Hello, welcome back, all you wonderful speech language pathologists. Today, we're going to talk about IEP meetings. As always, feel free to drop any comments, any advice, any resources, or any questions you have in the comments below so I can be sure that I'm responding to those and maybe making a video that helps you along your journey. I want to go into IEP do's and IEP don'ts. As somebody who has sat in a lot of IEP meetings as a speech language pathologist, I definitely have seen a lot of things I would like to continue doing in IEP meetings and things that myself or maybe other team members maybe shouldn't do in order to make sure that we are doing what is best for the student and keeping the needs of our student and their caregivers at the forefront of our minds. My first IEP do is to have the intention of making the entire IEP meeting feel like a fun, warm family gathering. These meetings can be full of a lot of concerns and questions, and we have to remember that we're talking about a human. So what can you do to make those things happen? Be warm and welcoming to the parents and other service providers that are coming into the meeting room. Share relatable stories about the student and maybe, keep at the forefront of everybody's mind the fact that you are talking about this living, breathing, beautiful human being. Also, it's never a bad idea to include your student in the IEP meeting if they're able to do so. When I was interning in a middle school and in a high school, I did see us bringing students into their meetings and having them give input on their goals, having them talk about how they feel they've made progress, having them talk about what they want to work on. This is really helpful, especially when you're working with neurodivergent students who have a lot to say about how they learn. Now, I work with preschoolers, so when they come into the meetings, I make sure I have something for them to play with. But it is also awesome when families bring my students into the meetings because they show us what they can do. An IEP don't for you would be, don't start off talking about anything that maybe seems any sort of negative. For instance, if the student maybe demonstrates some behaviors that are a little bit more challenging to work with in the classroom, or maybe they're exhibiting, those behaviors because they're having a difficult time communicating what they need or want, don't start the meeting off talking about them. And when you do want to address what is happening in the classroom, just address it as it's happening. Talk about when we go to this specific center, we start to see behaviors. Maybe the child runs for the door because they don't want to, they don't enjoy this center or things like that. But we don't have to talk about the fact that maybe it's a bad thing, because we have to remember we are, again, talking about a living, breathing, beautiful human being. And when we are describing what we see, we always come from a place of support, and we come from a place of looking at those things as a part of this human who has all these other beautiful things that make them unique. So an IEP do would be describe things as you see them that highlight strengths, that highlight the capabilities of the student. An IEP do have an agenda. An IEP don't be so rigid and hold yourself to that agenda to the point that when a parent asks you a question and you're not at that point in the meeting yet, you say, well, hold on, just wait, we'll get there. When we do this, we make parents feel like they are not fully a part of the team. We're dismissing a question, making them wait as if our time is more important than theirs. Now, I know that's not the intention a service provider has when running the meeting, but I have seen and heard from parents that when this happens, they do feel dismissed. And while there is that understanding of, well, we have an agenda, we have to keep to it, we know that as long as we hit every point on that agenda, we're going to be just fine. We've got to talk about the least restrictive environment. We've got to make our statement about the procedural safeguards and parent rights, which, yes, do that at the beginning because it makes sense. Answer those questions first. Something I like to do in my agenda is remind myself that we're going to talk about parent concerns first and foremost. When you talk about the parent concerns and ask them, what are your concerns? What are you seeing at home? What are you noticing that your child is doing very well? What would you like us to talk about in this meeting? If they ask a question at that time, feel free to answer it. When we have that agenda, I know it, let's say they ask a question about when their child is being seen. Well, that's way down here on the list at services. And we're still over here talking about, their progress or their present levels. And I know we talk about where they're at, their present levels, then we talk about goals drive services. Well, what is so wrong with saying, yes, let me answer your question about how often your child is being seen. Currently, I'm seeing your child twice a week for 20-minute sessions. So we can talk about that. And then we can say, we're gonna talk about goals, we're gonna talk about how they're doing. I am going to recommend some different services I'm thinking I wanna do, and then maybe lay it out. Then you're gonna go back and talk about everything, and you're going to justify what you said. And when you get to that point, if they have any more questions about that, we're gonna answer those too. When we dismiss the questions and say we're gonna get to that, I have heard from parents who have said, we don't pay attention to what else. Now, I'm not saying this is true of all parents, but I have heard that it's really hard to focus because there is that one main concern that wasn't answered in the beginning, and we're just waiting and waiting and waiting to get to it. Does that sound like a supportive environment, or does it sound like we're being a little bit dismissive? I just want to make sure that when I am in the IEP meeting, that we are first and foremost focused on our students. Well, who are the caregivers? Who is with that child the majority of the time? It's really important when we are working as a team in an IEP meeting, we see that parent or the caregivers as just, they are part of that team. They are part of that family who, when they ask questions, we talk about it. We talk about it together. We ask them for their input. Whenever I write my goals, recommended based off of what I've seen at school in the classroom. But I don't say, parents, this is the goal and move on to the next goal. I say, what do you think? Do you agree with this goal? That agenda, while it's a great resource for us to have to make sure we hit all these points, we can skip around if we have to. IEP do. Be open. Being open to other team members is going to allow for you to be a collaborative team member. An IEP do. Make a template if you need it. Something that really helps, and this really comes before the meeting. Make templates of how you would fill in different parts of the IEP. I think that when I started as a clinical fellow, I remember feeling so overwhelmed with the paperwork side of things because there's so many boxes to check. There's so many questions to answer on these documents about the specific student. But if you have a template that helps you kind of understand how to fill it out, it's really, really easy and really valuable. It takes maybe a day of work to kind of create all those templates, but then you're gonna be 5-6 years in realizing, oh, I made this 5 years ago and I'm really grateful I did that. An IEP don't go into the meeting and have that be the first time you're looking over your draft documents. Check, double check, triple check. Make sure before you enter the meeting, every piece of information that you've filled out has the correct student's name, and check those dates. Those are big. Now, there are going to be meetings where you have the wrong date in there, maybe because you didn't change the year from the last year or whatever. That's okay, change it. But I just really urge you to make sure that you are taking the time to go through with a fine-tooth comb and look through it at least 2 to 3 times. An IEP do. Share moments that make you laugh. Share relatable, fun, good, human moments in the IEP whenever you can. This is something a couple years ago I went on a podcast and I shared about how I like to make jokes in IEP meetings. Share a joke, and obviously something that relates to the meeting. I always like to share silly moments that my students have. There was one moment I will never forget where a student told me to calm down, and it was just something so funny to share in the meeting. And the parent really just relaxed and laughed with us and, just saw that like, oh, you're here looking at my child as another human. It's not just this piece of paper. And when we do that, we are building that connection. I will say it over and over again. The connection doesn't stop in our therapy room. We have to take that outside to the team. An IEP do. Be the rebel that is child-focused. When you have a meeting full of all of these adults, and maybe the child or the student isn't present in their meeting, somebody has to always bring the team back in case things go awry. I have been in IEP meetings where 2 professionals and service providers can't agree on services. I've been in IEP meetings where a parent is really hoping for more services for their child and the team kind of comes back and there's some disagreement. Whatever it takes to bring that meeting back to a common ground of, hey, we are here for the student, this child. And again, if a parent is fighting for services, it's really important to hear them out. If you have to hold a continuation meeting and talk with more professionals and collaborate a little bit more, by all means do it. But if you're in that meeting and things start to feel tense and you feel that we're missing the mark here, say it. Just say, hey, let's just remember, we are here to talk about and what best meets their needs. And so can we come to a common ground about the student? It can be a scary move, but it will always be the right move. An IEP due, if you get nervous, make sure maybe the 5 minutes before you walk into that meeting, look over all the documents, refamiliarize yourself with parent names, sibling names, student birthday. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a meeting and I've gotten a little bit jittery or nervous and I want to go and say something to the parent and then my brain blanks and I forget their name. And so sometimes looking over those things just right before helps kind of put it fresh in my brain. And remember, parents get nervous for these meetings too. I think we forget sometimes if we're nervous, to talk with a family about their child, they might be more nervous to talk about their own child because there's big decisions that happen for their kids and their parents, and that's the biggest job in the world. And so it's just so important that we are doing all the little things you can to make that space feel safe and inviting. It's gonna make it just so much better for everybody. IEP, don't let your clinical ego get in the way. This kind of sums up everything, when you're thinking about the logistics of an IEP meeting and, going through that agenda and making sure you hit all your points and being flexible when a parent has a question or another team member has a question. Just because you know the order of operations doesn't mean we can't jump back and justify later. The best advice I was ever given about an IEP meeting is don't forget and don't lose sight of who we're there for. We're there for the student. And so when we start to feel that our clinical judgment is being questioned, while that can be difficult because we do the work and we learned the things, it's so important that we are thinking about the child. If a parent has a question or concern or doesn't like a goal that we've written for their child, then how can we talk with our egos down to, discuss maybe a better goal or how to tweak the goal so we agree or whatever it is to make sure that we are truly putting the child first. I think I got through everything. There's probably so much more than, a 10, 15, 20-minute video. If you're interested in talking more about these things and you found this helpful, please let me know. I would love to find what works for you in terms of planning a workshop or an event where we can come together and learn together about all things IEP meetings, school-based SLP, life, mindset. So feel free to pop that in the comments. As always, have a beautiful day and I will see you in the next one.